The cold had fallen hard and fast, settling over the land like a heavy white shroud, freezing everything it touched. Minneapolis, Minnesota, Wednesday, November 26, 2025, 5:42 a.m. The sun had not yet risen over the Twin Cities when the first urgent reports reached the Minnesota Emergency Response Center. Outside, the wind howled through steel bridge trusses and between the empty buildings downtown. Snowflakes spun wildly in every direction, carried by gusts that tore down the streets like invisible currents. The temperature hovered around 12 degrees Fahrenheit, but the wind, whipping at nearly 40 miles per hour, pushed the real field temperature deep below zero. Anyone stepping outside felt the winter bite instantly. The storm that had seized the Midwest was expected, of course. Meteorologists had warned people to consider delaying travel, especially during one of the busiest holiday weeks of the year. But what no one predicted, not the forecasters, not the state agencies, not even the seasoned residents, was that this early winter system would evolve into one of the most destructive Thanksgiving storms in more than a decade. The transformation began the previous afternoon, quietly at first. Around 2 p.m. on Tuesday, Minneapolis was drenched in a cold drizzle. But less than 3 hours later, the entire sky inverted. The rain thickened, hardened, and turned abruptly into heavy, wet snow that stuck to everything it touched. Road surfaces glazed over in minutes. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Drivers watched their windshield wipers fight a losing battle against the dense flakes that smacked against the glass. Gusts rose steadily, pushing thick curtains of snow across every highway and neighborhood. By early evening, the National Weather Service issued a winter storm warning. Forecasters predicted between 6 and 10 inches for most of the Twin Cities and even more in the Arrowhead region. Some areas inland were already approaching 12 inches, and the storm was still strengthening. Within hours, a dangerous layer of ice formed beneath the snow, unseen but deadly. As the accumulation deepened, visibility plunged, and the storm began its assault on the region's infrastructure. Minnesota's Department of Transportation reported conditions deteriorating faster than plows could manage. Roads that had been wet an hour earlier turned into slick, treacherous surfaces that even seasoned winter drivers struggled to navigate. The most dramatic problems erupted along the state's busiest arteries. Interstate 94, the main east-west corridor, was hit first and hardest. By midnight, dozens of semis were struggling to maintain traction. By dawn, more than 260 trucks across multiple routes in Minnesota, many jackknifed, overturned, or simply frozen in place, had stopped traffic entirely. A massive pileup involving over 25 vehicles near St. Cloud turned the interstate into a maze of crumpled metal, shattered glass, and panicked drivers trapped inside their cars. But as Minnesota fought its way through the storm's first terrible wave, a different kind of crisis unfolded in Michigan. Detroit, Michigan, 6:15 a.m. The same morning, 9 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind blasting at 35 miles per hour. Snow swirling with an almost blinding intensity. Here, the chaos was triggered not just by snow, but by the invisible killer beneath it. In the early hours before dawn, cold rain had frozen solid across highways, forming a glass-like surface so smooth and transparent that even seasoned drivers could not detect it. When the snow arrived, it blanketed this ice silently, masking it entirely. Cars slid without warning. Trucks lost their grip in slow, inevitable arcs. The slightest turn of the wheel caused vehicles to drift, spin, or fishtail sideways. In the Upper Peninsula, lake-effect snow began dumping accumulations that climbed past 14 inches before sunrise. Moisture rising from the relatively warmer waters of the Great Lakes collided with the frigid air pouring down from Canada. The result was a relentless bombardment of heavy bands of snow targeting towns and highways unlucky enough to sit beneath the shifting clouds. Accidents multiplied rapidly. Over 600 traffic incidents were reported in the first 48 hours. Near Flint, more than 40 vehicles collided in a devastating chain reaction along Interstate 75, leaving a frozen line of cars stretching for nearly a mile. Southward, close to Kalamazoo, a large interstate bus slid on the hidden ice, skidded sideways, and struck a guardrail with violent force. More than 20 passengers were injured, some seriously enough to require immediate hospitalization. State police struggled to reach the victims. Each new mile of roadway presented a fresh hazard. Tractor-trailers sprawled across multiple lanes, cars half buried in snow after sliding off into ditches, or drivers sitting helplessly inside motionless vehicles waiting for help. Back in Minnesota, dispatch centers were overwhelmed. Operators answered one emergency call only to be met with 3 more waiting. Reports poured in of collisions, disabled vehicles, trapped motorists, and entire stretches of highway blocked by jackknife semis. Responders prioritized the most urgent cases, but even that turned into an impossible task as conditions grew more chaotic by the hour. Snowplow operators described whiteout conditions so severe that they could barely see the ends of their own plow blades. Roadside crews reported wind gusts that shoved their vehicles sideways. Tow operators faced a brutal combination of freezing cables, unstable wrecks, and unpredictable surfaces. Every task became a fight against the weather. By mid-morning, reporters finally reached the scenes that had been only disembodied voices over the scanners minutes earlier. What they captured looked more like war zones than highways. Semi-trailers lay on their sides like overturned beasts. Their cargo spilled across the snow. Cars looked mangled, some crushed between two larger vehicles, others spun at unnatural angles across lanes. Snow swirled through broken windows and drifted over seats. The air was filled with a mix of whistling wind, distant sirens, and the muffled shouts of rescuers coordinating efforts. Some motorists remained inside their vehicles, too afraid to step out into the blinding snow. Others wandered the shoulders with blankets wrapped around their shoulders, searching for help. In one case, a mother and her 2 children were found sitting silently inside a car half buried in a drift, grateful but terrified when rescuers tapped on the windows. Truckers stranded for hours shared blankets, flashlights, and hot thermoses with families stuck between them. Highway patrol officers made their way vehicle by vehicle, ensuring that drivers who were trapped in long standstills kept their engines running safely or, when fuel ran low, transported them to emergency warming buses. Across both states, airports struggled just as severely. Minneapolis-St. Paul International logged more than 150 flight delays and cancellations, while Detroit Metropolitan reported over 200 disruptions as plows fought to keep tarmacs even remotely usable. Taxiways vanished under blowing snow faster than teams could clear them. Airlines urged passengers not to come unless absolutely necessary. By afternoon, tens of thousands of homes across Minnesota and Michigan had lost power. The weight of the wet snow pulled down tree limbs that tore through power lines. In some neighborhoods, transformers exploded in blue flashes against the white sky. With temperatures stuck below freezing, the blackout became more than an inconvenience. It became a danger. Schools across both states announced closures. Businesses shut down. City buses struggled to operate. Rural communities were effectively cut off. Emergency shelters opened in community centers, gymnasiums, and churches, providing warmth and food to stranded travelers and residents without heat. Meteorologists later explained the event as a rare convergence of 3 powerful forces: a fast-moving low-pressure clipper system, a deep surge of Arctic air, and moisture drawn from the Great Lakes. Each element alone could create severe conditions, but together they formed a perfect alignment, exactly the wrong storm at exactly the wrong time, hitting during one of the busiest travel weeks in America. Throughout the chaos, human stories emerged: small moments of fear, perseverance, and resilience. A father outside Monticello searched the snowdrifts around his stalled car, trying to retrieve holiday groceries blown away by the wind. A woman traveling with her children found shelter in a school bus converted into a warming station. Groups of truck drivers helped stranded families by offering warm seats inside their cabs. Strangers shared snacks, power banks, even spare gloves. As the hours stretched into days, Minnesota and Michigan continued their exhausting battle against the storm. Only by Saturday, November 29th, were the major highways finally cleared. Snowplow operators had worked continuous shifts exceeding 30 hours. Tow crews hauled away hundreds of vehicles scattered across the interstates. Utility workers braved bitter conditions to restore power to more than 120,000 homes across the 2 states. The final assessment was sobering: more than 1,000 accidents across the Midwest, dozens seriously injured, over 300 trucks mobilized or damaged. Massive travel disruptions. Yet, in a remarkable stroke of luck and skilled emergency response, no major fatalities were recorded in the largest pileups. Thanksgiving 2025 became a somber reminder of how quickly the familiar can turn hostile. even in regions accustomed to winter's wrath. It highlighted how fragile modern infrastructure